At my birthday, my daughter-in-law said I wouldn't be around next year. So I rewrote the will and left her name under nothing. I never expected my 68th birthday to become the day I discovered what my family really thought of me. The evening had started so pleasantly. My son James and his wife Sarah had insisted on hosting the party at their home. They'd even gone through the trouble of decorating the dining room with fresh flowers and my favorite blue tablecloth that I'd given them last Christmas. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. My other son Michael couldn't make it, again. He called with some excuse about work in Denver. I tried not to let it bother me, though the empty chair at the table was a constant reminder that my family was shrinking, not growing. "Mom, make a wish," James said, placing a store-bought cake in front of me. 68 candles would have been a fire hazard, so they'd gone with just one large candle in the center. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and blew it out. What did I wish for? The same thing I always do: health and happiness for my family. Little did I know how ironic that wish would soon become. After dinner, Sarah started clearing the plates while James poured more wine. I offered to help with the dishes, but Sarah insisted I stay seated. "It's your birthday, Margaret. You should relax." I nodded and stayed at the table, watching them move around the kitchen. They thought I couldn't hear them, but age may have weakened my knees, not my ears. "Did you talk to the financial advisor?" Sarah whispered to James as she rinsed a plate. "Not yet. We'll discuss it next week," James replied, his voice barely audible. "We need to make sure everything's in order," Sarah continued. "I mean, she probably won't be around next year anyway. Did you see how she struggled to get up the front steps?" I felt my heart stop. My hands grew cold against my wine glass. "Sarah, keep your voice down," James hissed, but he didn't contradict her. He didn't defend me. "I'm just being practical," Sarah responded, loading the dishwasher. "Your mom's not getting any younger. The inheritance needs to be properly managed when the time comes." I sat there, frozen, as the truth washed over me. They were waiting for me to die. My son and his wife were discussing my death and their inheritance, as casually as they might discuss their weekend plans. The cake in my stomach turned to stone. I wanted to scream, to throw my wine in their faces, to demand how they could be so cruel, but decades of maintaining composure kept me still and silent. I took a sip of water instead, my hand trembling slightly as I lifted the glass to my lips. When they returned to the table, I smiled as if I hadn't heard a word. "This was a lovely evening. Thank you both so much." "Our pleasure, Mom," James said, patting my hand in a gesture that now felt hollow. "We should do this more often," Sarah added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I wondered how I'd never noticed before how her smiles always seemed calculated. The drive home that night was a blur. My thoughts raced as I gripped the steering wheel. How long had they been waiting for me to die? Was this why James had been so interested in my finances lately, asking about my investments and insurance policies? I thought about all the times I'd helped them, paying for James's college, lending them money for the down payment on their house, babysitting my grandson Tommy whenever they asked. I'd given them everything I could, and in return, they were counting down the days until I was gone. The following morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, watching the birds at the feeder outside my window. I'd always found peace in these small moments, but today, there was only a hollow ache in my chest. My phone rang. It was my friend Elaine. "Happy belated birthday," she chirped. "How was the party?" "Enlightening," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "Margaret, what happened?" Elaine had known me for 30 years. She could hear what I wasn't saying. "I found out what my family really thinks of me," I said, finally allowing the words to come out. I told her everything. The whispered conversation, the plans for my inheritance, the casual dismissal of my continued existence, those ungrateful. Elaine didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "What are you going to do?" I looked down at the notepad where I'd been jotting things down since 5 a.m. "I'm calling my lawyer today." "Good," Elaine said firmly. "And then?" "And then I'm going to live as long and as well as I possibly can, just to spite them." After hanging up, I called Edward Green, my attorney for the past 20 years. His secretary put me through immediately. "Margaret, what can I do for you today?" Edward's voice was as kind and professional as always. "I need to make some changes to my will," I said. "Significant changes." "I see," he replied, not pressing for details. I can fit you in tomorrow at 10 a.m. if that works for you. Perfect, I said. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Tommy, my 8-year-old grandson. He was the only truly innocent one in all this. I remembered how his eyes lit up when I taught him to bake cookies last month, how he asked me questions about what life was like when I was young. Unlike his parents, Tommy seemed to value me for more than what I could give him. As the first light of dawn filtered through my curtains, I made a decision. I wouldn't let Sarah and James's betrayal poison the love I had for Tommy. Whatever happened next, I would protect him, both from them and from becoming like them. I got out of bed, made a strong cup of coffee, and began to write out exactly what I wanted to happen with my estate. By the time I finished, the sun was fully up and my path was clear. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. This was about making sure that love and decency were rewarded, while greed and cruelty received exactly what they deserved. Nothing. As I drove to the lawyer's office, I felt lighter than I had in years. Sarah thought I wouldn't be around next year. Well, I had news for her. I wasn't going anywhere anytime soon, and when I eventually did, she'd discovered just how wrong she had been about everything. Edward's office hadn't changed in 20 years. The same oak desk, the same leather chairs, even the same landscape paintings on the walls. There was comfort in this consistency, especially now when everything else in my life felt like shifting sand. So, Margaret, Edward said, looking up from his notes, you want to make substantial changes to your will? Yes. I handed him the notes I'd prepared. I want to be very specific about who gets what. Edward scanned my notes, his expression carefully neutral. I see. This is quite different from your previous arrangements. My circumstances have changed, I said simply. May I ask what prompted this? Edward had been not just my lawyer but also my friend since Roger died. He was the one who helped me navigate the financial chaos my husband's sudden death had left behind. I overheard some truths that couldn't be unheard. I explained what had happened at my birthday dinner, keeping my voice steady even as the pain of it washed over me again. Edward's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of anger. I'm sorry, Margaret, that's difficult to hear. Yes, it was. I straightened in my chair. But it was also necessary. I've spent years assuming things about my family that weren't true. As Edward worked on drafting the new will, my mind drifted back to all the sacrifices I'd made for my children, especially for James. After Roger died of a heart attack at 52, I was left with 2 teenage boys and a mortgage I could barely afford on my teaching salary. There was some life insurance, but not enough. I took on extra tutoring jobs in the evenings and weekends. I sold my jewelry, except for my wedding ring. I cut every corner possible to make sure my boys wouldn't feel the financial strain. When James was accepted to Cornell, his dream school, the tuition was well beyond what we could afford. I remortgaged the house I had just paid off to cover the costs. I never told him. I wanted him to focus on his studies, not worry about money. Michael decided to attend the state university with a partial scholarship, which eased the burden somewhat. He always seemed more aware of our financial situation than James, often refusing things I offered because he knew we couldn't really afford them. After college, James met Sarah during his first job at a marketing firm. She was ambitious, stylish, and came from money. From the beginning, I sensed she saw James as a project, someone she could mold into the successful husband she envisioned for herself. But he was clearly smitten, and I kept my concerns to myself. When they decided to buy their first house, they were short on the down payment. James called me, explaining how perfect the house was, how they couldn't let this opportunity slip away. Without hesitation, I gave them $30,000, money I had been saving for a retirement trip across Europe I'd always dreamed of taking. Are you sure, Mom? James had asked, but his eyes were already gleaming with the prospect of getting the house. Of course, I'd said. What good is money if I can't help my children? Sarah had sent a thank you note, her handwriting perfect and impersonal. I still remember the words. Thank you for your generous contribution to our future. We'll have you over once we're settled. As if I'd made a donation to a charity, not given them my retirement dream. Over the years, there were countless other instances, helping them furnish the house, paying for Tommy's preschool when they complained about the cost, covering the repairs when their roof leaked. Each time, the gratitude grew more perfunctory, the expectation more apparent. Michael's path was different. He struggled after college, bouncing between jobs before finally finding his footing in Denver. He rarely asked for help, and when he did, it was always with a promise to repay me, which he usually kept. We didn't speak as often as I would have liked, but when we did, he asked about my life, not just what I could do for him. Margaret? Edward's voice pulled me back to the present. I've drafted the new will according to your specifications. Would you like to review it now? I nodded, taking the document from him. The legal language was dense, but the intent was clear. My house and the majority of my financial assets would be placed in a trust for Tommy's education, only accessible when he turned 25. Michael would receive a fair portion, recognizing the independence he'd always maintained. James would receive a small sum, enough to acknowledge him as my son, but not enough to reward his betrayal. And Sarah. Sarah's name appeared exactly once in the document, under a section titled Specific Exclusions. Is this what you had in mind? Edward asked as I finished reading. Yes, I said, my voice stronger than it had been in days. Exactly what I had in mind. I should inform you, Edward said carefully, that specific exclusions like this can sometimes be contested, especially by family members who expected to receive more. I understand. That's why I've also written this. I handed him a sealed letter. I want this to be stored with the will and opened only in the event of my death. It explains exactly why I've made these decisions. Edward nodded, taking the letter. Very thorough, Margaret, as always. As I signed the new will, I felt a strange mix of sadness and liberation. This document represented the end of certain illusions I'd held dear, that my sacrifices had been seen and valued, that my love had been returned in kind. But it also represented a new beginning, a chance to direct my remaining years and resources toward those who truly deserved them. On my way home, I stopped by Tommy's elementary school. Watching from my car as the children poured out at the end of the day, I spotted him immediately, his wild brown hair and oversized backpack making him easy to identify even in the crowd. He was laughing with a friend, his face animated in a way I rarely saw when his parents were around. Seeing him made me certain I'd made the right decision. Tommy deserved better than to grow up thinking people were only valuable for what they could provide, that relationships were transactions rather than connections. I waved as he noticed my car, his face lighting up with genuine pleasure at seeing me. As he ran toward me, I made a silent promise to myself and to him. I would not let Sarah and James's betrayal define the rest of my life or his. I would show him through example that true love was generous without expectation, kind without calculation, and I would live, stubbornly, joyfully live, far longer than anyone expected. Over the next few weeks, I began observing Sarah and James with new eyes. It's amazing what you notice when you're no longer blinded by unconditional love and trust. Sunday dinners at their house became my weekly research expedition. I'd accept their invitations with a smile, all while documenting the patterns I now saw clearly. Mom, we were thinking, James said during one such dinner, cutting into his roast beef. That guest room of yours is getting a bit dusty. Have you considered downsizing? There are some nice retirement communities not far from here. I took a sip of water, considering my response. I'm quite happy in my home, James, but thank you for your concern. Sarah jumped in, her voice sweet but her words calculated. We just worry about you rattling around in that big house all alone. What if you fell? Who would help you? I have my alert bracelet, I said, tapping the device on my wrist that I'd purchased after Roger died. And my neighbor Carol checks on me every day. Still, Sarah persisted, exchanging a glance with James. Wouldn't it be easier to be somewhere with staff? People your own age? I smiled politely. When I need that level of care, I'll consider it. For now, I'm perfectly capable of living independently. What I didn't say was that I'd started keeping a journal documenting these conversations. Every time they pushed for me to sell my house or simplify my finances, I wrote it down with the date and exact wording. It was becoming quite a substantial record. The patterns were obvious now. Sarah would plant the seed, usually framed as concern, for my well-being. James would support her, though he seemed uncomfortable with the more direct approaches. Then they would back off temporarily before trying again from a slightly different angle. What bothered me most was how they talked about me in front of Tommy, as if I were already diminished, already less than whole. Grandma doesn't understand how cell phones work, Sarah once told him when I asked her to speak up rather than text at the dinner table. Old people get confused by technology. Tommy had looked at me uncertainly, and I saw the first seeds of doubt being planted in his mind about his grandmother's competence. Actually, I had responded calmly, I prefer face-to-face conversations. I taught computer skills at the high School for 15 years, Tommy. I can show you how to build a simple website sometime if you'd like. The surprise on his face was both sweet and heartbreaking. One Tuesday morning, I received an unexpected call from Michael. Mom? His voice sounded different, hesitant. Do you have a minute to talk? Of course, I said, settling into my armchair. Is everything all right? I'm not sure, he said. I got a strange call from James yesterday. He was asking about your health, whether you'd mentioned any memory issues to me, if I'd noticed you acting differently when we talked. My heart sank. What did you tell him? That as far as I could tell, you were sharp as ever, Michael replied. Mom, what's going on? James mentioned something about possibly needing to manage your finances if things get worse. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of this new betrayal settle. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were actively looking for ways to take control before that happened. Mom, are you still there? Yes, I said, opening my eyes. Michael, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. I told him everything. The birthday conversation, the constant pressure to downsize, the subtle undermining of my competence, and my decision to change my will. Michael was silent for a long moment after I finished. I had no idea, he finally said. I mean, I knew Sarah could be difficult, but this is something else. You believe me? I asked, surprised at how much I needed to hear him say it. Of course I believe you, he said firmly. You've never been one to exaggerate or imagine things, Mom. Relief washed over me. I hadn't realized how isolated I'd felt until someone else validated what I was experiencing. I should have been around more, Michael continued, regret heavy in his voice. I've been so caught up in my own life. You have your own family, your own responsibilities, I assured him. That's no excuse. His voice grew determined. I'm coming to visit next month. I already have some time off scheduled. We can talk more then. After we hung up, I sat quietly, processing this unexpected alliance. For years, I'd assumed Michael's distance meant he cared less. Now I wondered if it simply meant he cared differently, without the underlying current of what he could gain from the relationship. Later that week, I had my annual physical. Dr. Matthews had been my physician for over a decade, and I trusted her completely. All your tests look excellent, Margaret, she said, reviewing the results. Your blood pressure is actually better than last year. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. Thank you, I said. I've been walking more and watching my diet. After a moment's hesitation, I added, would you mind putting a note in my file about my cognitive status? Just stating that I'm mentally competent and not showing any signs of dementia or confusion? Dr. Matthews looked up from her computer, studying me carefully. Has someone suggested otherwise? I explained the situation briefly. Her expression darkened as I spoke. I'm sorry you're dealing with this, she said when I finished. And yes, I'll document your cognitive status. You're as sharp as any patient I have, Margaret. I'd also be happy to provide a formal assessment letter if you ever need it. Thank you, I said. I hope I won't need it, but it's good to be prepared. That evening, as I watered my garden in the fading light, I thought about how much had changed in just a few weeks. The pain of James and Sarah's betrayal hadn't diminished, but it was now accompanied by a growing resolve. I'd spent my life caring for others, often at the expense of my own needs and desires. Now, it was time to care for myself with the same dedication, not out of selfishness, but out of self-respect. As if the universe was affirming my decision, my phone rang. It was Tommy. Grandma, he said, his voice hushed. Can I come stay with you this weekend? Mom and Dad said no, but I really want to. You'd have to ask your parents, sweetheart, I said, though nothing would make me happier. I did, he insisted. They said they need couple time. Please, Grandma, I could help you in the garden like last time. I hesitated, not wanting to cause conflict, but also unwilling to reject my grandson's genuine desire to spend time with me. Let me talk to your dad, I said finally. I'll see what I can do. To my surprise, James agreed quickly when I called. Too quickly, perhaps. It made me wonder what couple time really entailed and what they might be discussing when Tommy wasn't around. No matter. A weekend with Tommy would be good for both of us, and it would give me a chance to strengthen the bond that Sarah seemed increasingly determined to weaken. The weekend with Tommy was exactly what I needed. He arrived Friday afternoon with his backpack stuffed with books, his tablet, and a half-finished model airplane. Dad never has time to help me with it, he explained as he carefully unpacked the pieces on my dining room table. He's always working or talking with Mom about grown-up stuff. I examined the model, a World War II fighter plane. Well, I'm not an expert, but I think between the two of us we can figure it out. Tommy's face lit up. Really? You'll help me? We spent the evening working on the model, talking about school and his friends. Not once did he mention video games or television. When I commented on this, he shrugged. I like doing real things with you, Grandma. At home, Mom and Dad are always busy, so I mostly play games by myself. My heart ached at his matter-of-fact description of loneliness. Saturday morning, we worked in the garden. Tommy had his own pair of gloves I'd bought him last summer. He took his gardening duties seriously, carefully pulling weeds and asking questions about each plant. As we worked, Mrs. Walters from next door came over with a basket of fresh muffins. "I thought you and your helper might want a snack," she said, smiling at Tommy. "Those are blueberry, your favorite, if I remember correctly." "Carol checks on me every day," I told Tommy as we took a break. "We take care of each other." "That's nice," Tommy said thoughtfully. "Mom says old people shouldn't live alone because they need help all the time, but you help each other." I exchanged a glance with Carol, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Later, after Tommy went inside to wash up, she turned to me. "He's repeating something he's heard," she said, her voice low. "I know," I sighed. "It's been happening more often lately." "Margaret," Carol hesitated, "I don't mean to pry, but I've noticed James and Sarah stop by more frequently. They're always looking around your house like they're taking inventory. Is everything all right?" I hadn't told anyone except Michael and Edward about what I'd overheard, but Carol had been a true friend for years. "They're waiting for me to die," I said bluntly. "They want my house and whatever money I have left." Carol didn't look shocked, which surprised me. "I've suspected something like that," she admitted. "The way Sarah looks at your things, asking if you've ever thought of selling that nice china cabinet or commenting on how valuable your antique clock is." "You noticed that too?" I asked, relieved I wasn't imagining things. "Hard not to," Carol said. "Especially the way she cornered me last month to ask if I thought you were slipping mentally. I told her you're twice as sharp as most people half your age." My throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you for that." "It's just the truth," Carol shrugged. "Listen, Margaret, I know we joke about checking on each other, but I want to make it official. Let's agree to text each other every morning. If either of us doesn't respond by 10 a.m., the other comes over or calls. No exceptions." I nodded, grateful for her practical suggestion. Agreed. Sunday evening came too quickly. James arrived to pick up Tommy, his smile tight as he stepped into my living room. "The place looks the same," he said, glancing around. His tone suggested this wasn't a good thing. "Why would it look different?" I asked innocently. Tommy launched into an excited description of everything we'd done: the model airplane, gardening, baking cookies, and our nature walk. James nodded, but I could tell he was only half listening. "We should do this again soon," I suggested as they prepared to leave. "Definitely," Tommy agreed enthusiastically. "We'll see," James said, non-committal. "Tommy's schedule gets pretty busy with soccer starting next month." The next morning, I received a call from my doctor's office. "Mrs. Thornton, this is Deborah from Dr. Matthews' office. The doctor asked me to let you know that someone called requesting information about your recent physical and cognitive evaluation." I sat down, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. Who was it? A woman who identified herself as your daughter-in-law. Dr. Matthews didn't release any information, of course. She explained that we would need a signed release form from you. The woman seemed insistent. After hanging up, I called Edward immediately and told him what had happened. "This is concerning," he said. "It suggests they're actively looking for ways to challenge your competence." "What should I do?" I asked. "Document everything," Edward advised. "Write down this incident with the date and time. If they try anything like this again, we'll have a record of it. And Margaret? You might want to consider talking to James directly. Sometimes clearing the air can prevent things from escalating." I thanked him for his advice, but I wasn't sure a direct confrontation was the right approach yet. James would deny everything, and Sarah would paint me as paranoid or confused, exactly the narrative they were trying to establish. Instead, I decided to call Michael. As luck would have it, he had news of his own. "Mom, I'm coming next week. Instead of next month," he said as soon as he answered. "I've been thinking about everything you told me, and I don't want to wait." "What about your work?" I asked, surprised by the sudden change in plans. "I can work remotely for a while," he explained. "My company's pretty flexible. I've already got an Airbnb booked for 2 weeks. You could stay here," I offered. "I have plenty of room." "Thanks, but I think it's better if I have my own space," Michael said. "It will give you privacy and make it less obvious to James that something's changed." I hadn't considered that, but he was right. If Michael suddenly moved in with me, it would alert James and Sarah that something was different. After we hung up, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Michael was coming. I wouldn't be facing this alone anymore. That evening, my phone pinged with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of James, Sarah, and Tommy at what appeared to be a restaurant. The caption read, "Family dinner. Wish you could have joined us, but we figured the drive might be too much for you these days." I stared at the screen. The restaurant. In the photo was Martinelli's, barely 10 minutes from my house. They hadn't invited me. This was a deliberate exclusion, followed by a thinly veiled suggestion that I was too frail to join them even if they had. Instead of responding with the hurt or anger they probably expected, I simply wrote back, "Martinelli's looks nice. Hope you enjoyed your meal." Then I set my phone aside, refusing to give them the satisfaction of knowing they had wounded me. But inside, my resolve hardened further. The game they were playing was becoming clearer by the day, and I was determined not to lose. Michael arrived the following Tuesday, stopping by my house directly from the airport. I hardly recognized him at first. It had been nearly a year since his last visit. He looked more like his father than ever, with the same crinkles around his eyes when he smiled. "Mom," he said, wrapping me in a tight hug. "You look great." "So do you," I replied, taking in the sight of my youngest son. "How was your flight?" Fine. He waved away the question. "Tell me what's been happening." We sat at my kitchen table, the same one where we'd had countless family meals when the boys were growing up. I showed Michael my journal, the documented attempts by Sarah to gain access to my medical records, and the text about the family dinner I wasn't invited to. Michael's expression darkened as he read through everything. "This is worse than I thought," he said finally. "They're not just waiting for you to die. They're actively trying to push you out of the picture." "That's how it feels," I admitted. "Have you talked to James directly about any of this?" I shook my head. I was planning to observe a bit longer before confronting him. Michael nodded, understanding. "Probably smart. He'll just deny everything and warn Sarah to be more careful. But Mom, now that I'm here, I think it's time we had a family meeting. All of us." My stomach tightened at the thought. "Do you really think that's necessary?" "I do," Michael said firmly. "Not to change their minds. I doubt that's possible. But to let them know that you're not alone in this, that someone is watching out for you." After some discussion, we decided to invite James, Sarah, and Tommy for dinner on Friday. I would cook, as I always did, and Michael would bring up the issues we'd discussed. "Let them think this is just a normal family dinner with your visiting son," Michael suggested. "No need to tip them off beforehand." James seemed surprised when I called with the invitation, especially when I mentioned Michael was in town. "Michael's there? He didn't tell me he was coming." "It was a bit last minute," I explained. "He had some vacation time and thought it would be nice to visit." "Sure, we'll come," James said after a slight hesitation. "Sarah's been wanting to talk to you about some things anyway." "I bet she has," I thought, but kept my voice pleasant. "Wonderful. 6 o'clock on Friday, then." The next few days passed quickly. Michael and I fell into an easy routine, with him working from my dining room during the day, and us catching up in the evenings. It reminded me of when he was in college, studying at the same table while I graded papers. Friday arrived too soon. I spent the morning cooking pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and apple pie for dessert. Comfort food, the kind we ate when the boys were young. "It smells amazing in here," Michael said, coming into the kitchen after finishing his work for the day. "Need any help? You could set the table," I suggested. "The good dishes, I think." Michael raised an eyebrow but didn't comment as he began laying out my best china, the set I usually reserved for holidays and special occasions. At precisely 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. James, Sarah, and Tommy stood on the porch, Sarah holding a bottle of wine. Her smile faltered slightly when she saw Michael behind me. "Michael, what a surprise," she said, her voice overly bright. "James mentioned you were visiting, but I had no idea you'd be here tonight." "Where else would I be for a family dinner?" Michael replied pleasantly, but I caught the slight edge in his tone. Tommy pushed past the adults to give me a hug. "Grandma, I brought something to show you," he said, pulling a paper from his backpack. It was a drawing of the two of us working in the garden, carefully labeled in his messy handwriting. "It's beautiful, Tommy," I said, genuinely touched. "I'll put it right on the refrigerator." Dinner started pleasantly enough. We talked about safe topics. Tommy's school, Michael's job, the weather, but as I served the apple pie, Sarah cleared her throat. "Margaret, since we're all together, there's something James and I wanted to talk to you about." "Here it comes," I thought, exchanging a quick glance with Michael. We've been thinking, she continued, that it might be time for you to consider some changes in your living situation. What kind of changes? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. James jumped in. What Sarah means is that we worry about you being alone in this big house. It's a lot to maintain at your age. My age? I raised an eyebrow. I'm 68, James, not 98. Still, Sarah pressed. There are wonderful communities for active seniors where you wouldn't have to worry about home repairs or yard work. People your own age, activities, healthcare on site. Sounds like you've done your research, Michael commented, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Sarah nodded enthusiastically, missing the undercurrent. We've toured several places. Pine Ridge Estates is lovely, and it's only 20 minutes from our house. We could visit all the time. How thoughtful, I said. But I'm quite happy where I am. Mom, James said, his voice taking on the patient tone one might use with a child. We're thinking about what's best for you in the long term, your safety, your quality of life. My quality of life is excellent, thank you, I replied. I have my garden, my friends, my book club, and my volunteer work at the library. But what if something happens? Sarah persisted. What if you fall? Or worse? Then I'd use the alert bracelet I wear, I pointed out. The same one I've had for years. Sarah and James exchanged a look that spoke volumes. It was the same look they'd given each other at my birthday dinner, right before Sarah had commented that I wouldn't be around next year. Michael set down his fork with a deliberate click against the china. I think what Mom is trying to say is that she's not ready or interested in moving to a retirement community, and since she's mentally sharp, physically healthy, and financially stable, there's no reason she should have to. Sarah's smile tightened. Of course, Michael. We're just concerned, that's all. Don't you worry about her being so far away from all of you? I do, Michael admitted. But I worry more about people pushing her to make major life changes she doesn't want to make. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees. James looked between his brother and his wife, clearly uncomfortable. No one's pushing anything, he said defensively. We're just having a conversation. Are we? Michael asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you and Sarah have already decided what Mom should do, regardless of what she wants. That's not fair, Sarah protested, her voice rising slightly. Tommy looked up from his pie, sensing the tension. Why is everyone getting mad? He asked, his small voice cutting through the arguing. I reached over and patted his hand. Not mad, sweetheart, just a grown-up disagreement. Sarah stood abruptly. I think it's time we went home. Tommy has soccer early tomorrow. James nodded, looking relieved at the excuse to end the evening. Right, yes. Thanks for dinner, Mom. As they gathered their things, Michael pulled James aside. I couldn't hear what he said, but James's face flushed red. He nodded stiffly and followed Sarah and Tommy out the door without another word. After they left, Michael and I sat in silence for a moment. Well, I finally said, that wasn't exactly subtle. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know. I was planning to ease into it more, but something about the way they were talking to you, like you weren't even in the room, or like your opinion didn't matter. It's been like that for a while, I admitted. I just didn't see it clearly until recently. We cleaned up the kitchen together, the familiar routine soothing after the tense dinner. What did you say to James at the end? I asked as we finished, loading the dishwasher. Michael hesitated, then answered, I told him I knew about the conversation at your birthday dinner, that I knew they were waiting for you to die for their inheritance, and that if they tried to force you into a home or take control of your finances, they'd have to go through me and my lawyer first. I stared at him, shocked by the directness. You actually said that? I did, Michael confirmed, and judging by the look on his face, every word hit home. For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of hope. The confrontation hadn't gone as planned, but at least everything was out in the open now. James and Sarah knew they were being watched. They knew I wasn't alone. The question was, what would they do next? A year passed more quickly than I expected. After that tense dinner, James and Sarah kept their distance. They still brought Tommy for occasional visits, but they rarely stayed themselves, making excuses about errands or appointments. Michael returned to Denver but called more often and visited every few months. Tommy and I maintained our connection through weekend visits, which seemed to be the one thing James and Sarah couldn't bring themselves to refuse. The silence from them wasn't peace, it was calculation. I could feel it. They were waiting, regrouping, planning their next move. It came, predictably, on my 69th birthday. Mom, James called a week before, we want to host your birthday dinner again this year, the whole family together. I hesitated. Last year's birthday had been the catalyst for everything that followed. That's very kind, I said carefully, but I was thinking of having a small lunch with some friends from my book club. You can do both, he insisted. Our dinner will just be family. Please, Mom. It's important. Something in his voice made me agree, though I immediately called Michael afterward. I don't like it, he said when I told him. This feels like a setup. I think so too, I admitted. But I'm curious to see what they're planning. I'll fly in, Michael decided. I'll tell work it's a family emergency. It's not an emergency, I protested. Not yet, Michael said grimly, but I'm not taking chances. The birthday dinner was set for Saturday evening. Michael arrived Friday night, staying at the same Airbnb he'd used during his previous visit. Saturday morning, my phone rang. It was Carol from next door. Margaret, she said, her voice unusually serious. I overheard something you should know about. She explained that she'd been gardening near her fence when Sarah had pulled up to drop off Tommy, who was spending the morning with me while they prepared for the party. Sarah had been on her phone, talking loudly enough for Carol to hear clearly. She was telling someone that they were finally going to settle things at your birthday dinner, Carol reported. That they had documentation and were ready to have a difficult but necessary conversation about your living situation. My stomach tightened. Did she say what kind of documentation? No, but she mentioned something about Dr. Reynolds being very helpful. I frowned. I don't know any Dr. Reynolds. Neither do I, Carol said. But whatever they're planning, it doesn't sound good, Margaret. I thanked her for the warning and immediately called Edward, my lawyer. After explaining the situation, I asked him what Sarah might have meant by documentation. If they're trying to establish that you're not competent to manage your own affairs, they'd need medical evidence, Edward explained. Typically, that would come from your primary care physician, but since Dr. Matthews has clearly stated you're mentally fit, they might have sought a second opinion. But I haven't seen any other doctors, I pointed out. You wouldn't need to, Edward said grimly. In some cases, a geriatric psychiatrist can provide an evaluation based on descriptions of behavior from family members. It's not ethical without meeting the patient, but it happens. So they could have this Dr. Reynolds write something claiming I'm losing my cognitive abilities based solely on what Sarah and James told him? Possibly. It wouldn't stand up in court against your regular doctor's assessment, but it could be enough to create doubt among other family members or friends. After hanging up, I called Michael and relayed everything. That's it, he said firmly. We're not walking into their trap. You should cancel dinner. But canceling felt like giving them the upper hand. No, I decided. I want to see what they've done, what they're planning. I need to know how far they're willing to go. Then we need a plan of our own, Michael insisted. By the time Tommy and I finished baking cookies that morning, Michael and I had worked out exactly how to handle the evening ahead. The birthday dinner was scheduled for 6 p.m. Michael and I arrived together at 5:55, deliberately a few minutes early. The house was decorated with balloons and a happy birthday banner that looked hastily put up. Sarah greeted us with a tight smile. Margaret, Michael, you're early. We're still setting up. Why don't you wait in the living room? As we sat down, I noticed several documents spread out on the coffee table, partially covered by a magazine but clearly meant to be discovered during the evening. James came in from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. Mom, Michael, he said, nodding to each of us. Dinner's almost ready. Tommy ran in next, throwing his arms around me. Happy birthday, Grandma, I made you a card. The handmade card featured a drawing of me in my garden, surrounded by flowers. Inside, Tommy had written, To the best grandma ever. I love you all the way to the moon and back. It's beautiful, Tommy, I said, genuinely touched. Thank you. Dinner began with forced pleasantries and shallow conversation. Sarah kept glancing at James as if waiting for a signal, while James seemed increasingly nervous, constantly checking his watch. Finally, as Sarah cleared the dinner plates, James cleared his throat. Mom, before we have cake, there's something we need to discuss. Yes, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Sarah and I have been concerned about you for some time now, he began, using the same rehearsed tone from our previous conversations. We've noticed some changes in your behavior, your memory. What kind of changes? Michael asked before I could respond. James shot him an irritated look. Memory lapses, confusion about dates and times, instances where Mom has seemed disoriented. That's interesting, I said calmly. Can you give me a specific example? James hesitated, then continued. Last month, you forgot Tommy's soccer game. You were supposed to meet us there. I didn't forget, I corrected him. I told Sarah I couldn't make it because I had a doctor's appointment. I have the text exchange saved. Well, there have been other instances, Sarah interjected, returning from the kitchen. Like the time you couldn't remember where you parked at the mall. That happened once, 3 years ago, I pointed out. Everyone loses their car in a parking lot occasionally. Sarah's smile tightened. We've spoken with a specialist, Dr. Reynolds. He believes you may be in the early stages of dementia. Really? I raised an eyebrow. And did Dr. Reynolds examine me personally? He didn't need to, James jumped in. He's an expert in geriatric conditions. He reviewed the information we provided. Information you provided, Michael repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. Information that conveniently supports what you want to believe. Sarah reached for the documents on the coffee table. We have his assessment here. He recommends that Margaret consider memory care options and that she should no longer live alone or make major financial decisions. I took the papers she offered and read them carefully. The assessment was full of vague observations and conditional language. Maybe exhibiting, could indicate, possible signs of. This isn't a medical diagnosis, I said, handing the papers to Michael. This is speculation based on secondhand accounts. It's a professional opinion, Sarah insisted. From a doctor who's never met Mom, Michael pointed out, scanning the document. This is ridiculous and potentially illegal, James flushed. We're just trying to help before things get worse. No, I said firmly. You're trying to take control of my life and my assets. This isn't about my health. It's about my house and my money. How can you say that? Sarah gasped, putting on a show of being offended. Because I heard you at my birthday last year, I said, finally laying my cards on the table. I heard you tell James that I probably won't be around next year anyway, and that you needed to discuss my inheritance. The color drained from both their faces. You misunderstood, James stammered. I don't think she did, Michael said, pulling out his phone. In fact, we've been documenting everything, every attempt to access Mom's medical records without permission, every effort to isolate her from friends and family, every instance of trying to make her doubt her own competence. He turned to me. Should I show them the file we've compiled, or should we just move straight to the big reveal? I smiled at my youngest son, grateful beyond words for his support. I think it's time for the reveal. Michael nodded and turned back to James and Sarah. Mom rewrote her will last year, right after she overheard your conversation. Sarah's eyes widened. What? That's right, I confirmed, and as of 2 months ago, I've established an irrevocable trust for the majority of my assets. The house, my savings, my investments, they're all legally protected now. Protected from what? James asked, a hint of desperation in his voice. From you, Michael answered bluntly. Tommy looked between the adults, confusion on his face. Dad? What's going on? James ignored him, his focus entirely on me. What exactly does this mean, Mom? I looked at my oldest son, wishing things could have been different. It means that when I die, you and Sarah will receive exactly what's listed. Under your names in my will, nothing.